The day they hammered the first survey stake into my front pasture, I was sitting on the porch with a cup of cold coffee, watching the dust rise off the county road. It was a Tuesday, which meant my sister-in-law Susan usually had her bridge club, so I knew she wasn't behind this particular piece of aggravation. No, this was her husband Bill's handiwork, plain as the nose on your face. 2 months to the day since they put my best friend Charlie in the ground, and here they were, already circling like Buzza RDS over a dead possum. I set the coffee down and walked out to where the young fella in the HRD hat was wrestling with a metal post and a sledgehammer. He couldn't have been more than 25, with one of those trimmed BARDs that made him look like he'd just stepped out of a catalog. He saw me coming and straightened up, trying to look official. "Morning, sir," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Just marking the boundary for the new commercial zone. You should have received the notice from the county planning office." I pulled my pipe out of my shirt pocket and took my time packing it with tobacco. The sun was already getting warm, and the gnats were rooting to SWARM around my head. I'd been up since 4:30, as usual, mending fence where the old posts had rotted through. My back ached from stooping, and my hands were cracked from the bed wire. I didn't much feel like being polite. "I've had this land for 47 years," I said, striking a match and sucking on the pipe until the tobacco caught. "My daddy had it before me, and his daddy before him. You telling me the county can just come along and decide it's a commercial zone all of a sudden?" The young fella shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He had a Clippo ARD under his ARM, and I could see him glancing down at it like it might give him the answers. "I'm just following orders, sir. The Planning Commission approved the rezoning last month. There's a public hearing scheduled, but the preliminary work has to start. Public hearing my hind end." I took the pipe out of my mouth and pointed the stem at him. "Let me guess. Bill Tompkins was at that meeting. Wasn't he sitting there with his little glasses and his big smile, talking about economic development and job creation?" The young fella didn't say anything, but the way his EARS went red told me everything I needed to know that I'd known Bill Tompkins for 30 years, ever since he married my wife's younger sister. Back then he was a deputy clerk in the county assessor's office, a skinny little man with a nervous habit of clearing his throat before he spoke. Over the years he'd clawed his way up to a mid-level position in the planning department, and the power had gone to his head something fierce. He'd gotten soft and fat around the middle, bought himself a Cadillac, and SDA route talking like he owned the place. But what he really wanted was my FARM. It wasn't the FARM itself, exactly. Oh, he'd have been happy to tear down my house and plow under my cornfields, but that was just the price of admission. What Bill really wanted was the access. My FARM sat right between the new highway interchange and the strip of land where the county was planning its next big development. If he could get his hands on my 200 acres, he could sell them to the developers and make enough to retire to Florida 3 times over. Susan was in on it too, though she pretended to be concerned about my welfare every time she came by with her cheap fruit baskets and her sighs about how I was getting too old to work the land alone. The thing that galled me most was that they'd waited until Charlie was gone. Charlie knew the law inside and out, had spent 50 years as the only honest lawyer in this county, and Bill had always been SCA red of him. When Charlie was alive, Bill never would have to pull a stunt like this. But Charlie had been gone 2 months now, and they must have figured I was all alone, ripe for the picking. "Son," I said to the young fella with the Clippo ARD, "you can put your stake in the ground if you want to. But you tell Bill Tompkins that if he wants to fight me for this land, he'd better come down here himself and look me in the eye while he does it. I'm not going to be pushed around by some pencil pusher hiding in an office building." The young fella swallowed HRD and hammered his stake into the ground without another word. I watched him drive away in his county truck, kicking up gravel along the road. When the dust settled, I stood there looking at that survey stake, feeling a knot in my gut that I hadn't felt since I was 20 years old, sitting in a foxhole in Vietnam, waiting for the next mortar or round to come in. I walked back to the house and sat down in my chair on the porch. The old porch was all I had left of the life I'd built with Emerita. She used to sit beside me in the evenings, her hand resting on my knee, watching the sun go down over the cornfields. We'd talk about nothing much, the way people do when they've been married 30 years and don't need words to fill the silence. She'd been gone 6 years now, and some days the ache of it was still as fresh as the morning I woke up and found her cold beside me in the bed. I'd have given anything for her to be sitting there with me that Tuesday morning. She'd have known what to say to Bill, how to make him back down with a few quiet words and a steady look. But I wasn't Mayratha. I was just a stubborn old F.A. Romero who'd spent his whole life doing the same things the same way, and now I was out of my depth, the old hound. Duke limped up onto the porch and laid his head on my knee. He was too old to do much of anything except eat and sleep, but he'd been with me through the worst of it, and I reckon I loved him as much as I loved anything left in this world. I rubbed his EARS and STA read out at the survey stake, trying to figure my way out of this mess. I thought about Charlai. I thought about him every day, but that morning I thought about him more than usual. Charlai had been the one who saw me through Mayratha's illness, who sat with me in the hospital waiting room and told me bad jokes just to keep me from crying. He'd been the one who helped me with the funeral arrangements, who made sure everything was done right when I couldn't think straight. He'd been my best friend since we were 19 years old, getting our heads filled with lies about duty and honor, and then shipped off to a jungle where we found out the hard way what those words really meant. He'd come back from Vietnam with a piece of shrapnel in his leg and a quietness about him that hadn't been there before. He'd finished law school and come back to this county to practice, setting up a small office above the RDWA Re-store, never getting rich, but always getting by. He never married, though there'd been a few women over the years who'd tried to catch his eye. He always said he couldn't be married to the law and to a woman too, which I took to mean he'd been hurt bad by someone back in the old days and didn't want to risk it again. He'd been the one who stood up to Bill the first time, years ago, when Bill had tried to get the county to condemn a strip of my land for a road expansion. Charlai had found some old easement law that nobody had used in 50 years and shut the whole thing down before it got STA root. Bill had never forgiven him for that. I'd never really known all the details, just that Charlai had smiled that crooked smile of his and said, "Don't worry about a thing, Jim. I've got it covered." I should have known then that he was up to something. That was just Charlai's way. He never told you the full story, just gave you enough to keep you from worrying, and then went about his business in his own quiet manner. But he was gone now, and I was left with nothing but his memory and a growing sense of dread about what Bill had planned for me. That afternoon, I got a letter in the mail. It was from the County Planning Department, printed on fancy letterhead with the county seal and everything. It informed me that a preliminary hearing had been scheduled to discuss the commercial development initiative for my property, and that I was entitled to attend and present my objections if I had any. I didn't even need to look at the signature to know Bill was behind it. The whole thing was written in that cold, bureaucratic language he loved so much, the kind that made you feel like you were just a problem to be solved, not a person with a life and a history and a FARM that had been in your family for a century. I read the letter 3 times, feeling my blood pressure go up with each reading. Then I called Charlai's office out of habit, forgetting that he'd been dead 2 months. The phone rang, and finally a recorded voice came on saying the number had been disconnected. I hung up and sat there in my kitchen, feeling older than I'd ever felt before. The truth is, I hadn't been sleeping well since Charlai died. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I heard his truck pulling into the driveway, the way it used to when he'd stay late at the office and come by for a drink before going home. We'd sit on the porch and talk about old times, about the war, about the crazy things we'd done when we were young, about the people we'd lost along the way. Sometimes we'd talk about Mayratha, and he'd tell me stories about her that I'd never heard, the way she was in high school, before I ever met her. Those were the best nights, the ones where we laughed and cried in equal measure, 2 old men trying to make sense of the lives we'd lived. Charlai had been in the hospital for 3 weeks before he died. The doctors said it was his heart, that it had just worn out after all these years. He'd gone peacefully, at least, with me sitting beside him, holding his hand the way I'd held Mayratha's. He'd squeezed my hand and said something that I'd thought was delirium, about looking after the property and making sure nobody took what was mine. I told him not to worry about that everything was fine, that Bill was behaving himself. Charlai had just smiled that crooked smile and closed his eyes, and that was that. The best friend I ever had gone. Now I sat in my kitchen with the survey stake still planted in my pasture and the county letter in my hand, and I felt like I was drowning. I didn't have Charlie to call anymore. I didn't have his legal expertise or his calm way of making everything seem manageable. I was just an old man with a failing body and a FARM that I couldn't afford to keep and couldn't be or to lose that night. I drank too much whiskey and sat on the porch with Duke. STA ring out at the survey stake in the darkness. I thought about what Charlie would have done, and I couldn't come up with an answer that didn't involve some clever trick that only a lawyer would think of. I was never clever. I just worked hard and kept my head down and tried to do what was right. But that hadn't stopped the county from coming for my land, and I had a sinking feeling it wouldn't stop them from taking it either. I must have fallen asleep in that chair, because the next thing I knew it was just before dawn and Duke was barking at something on the road. I sat up stiffly, my neck aching from sleeping wrong, and looked out through the fog to see headlights coming up the driveway. I grabbed my old shotgun from behind the door, just in case it was Bill or one of his cronies coming to put more stakes in my ground while I was sleeping. But it wasn't a county truck that pulled up to my house. It was a black Lincoln with tinted windows, the kind of CA that only lawyers and funeral directors drive. I watched as a man in a dark suit got out of the driver's side and walked around to open the back door. Another man got out, tall and slender with graying hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. He was holding a leather briefcase and looked like he belonged in a city, not on my muddy FARM. James H.A. Risen, the man said, approaching the porch with his hand outstretched. His shoes were already muddy, and I could see he was trying not to let it bother him. My name is Thomas Hudson. I'm an attorney, and I've been retained to handle the final matters of Charlie Mitchell's estate. I lowered the shotgun slowly, though I didn't quite put it down. Something about the way he said Charlie's name made me uneasy. Charlie didn't have no estate. He had a little house, a beat-up truck, and an office full of old files. That was it. Mr. Hudson smiled a CA-reeful smile. You'd be surprised, Mr. H.A. Risen. Charlie was more resourceful than you know. May I come inside? I have something very important to give you. Something in his voice made me unlock the door and wave him in. Duke sniffed at his pants legs and gave him a suspicious look, but the lawyer seemed to know his way around dogs. He reached down and scratched Duke's ears in a way that made the old hound's tail start wagging. Good sign, I thought. Charlie always said you can trust a man who knows how to treat a dog. I led him into the kitchen and put some coffee on, though I noticed he didn't drink any. He sat at my table and opened his briefcase, pulling out a small velvet pouch that looked like it might hold jewelry or something equally precious. But when he opened it, what came out was an old-fashioned safe deposit key, rusted and worn, with a scrap of yellowed paper stuck to it with brittle tape. I was instructed by Mr. Mitchell to deliver this to you only under specific circumstances, Mr. Hudson said, pushing the key across the table tower, Ardemi. He said you would know when the time was right. He said to tell you that the key opens a box in the floor of his study, and that you should open it only if anyone ever tried to take your land. ISTA read at the key without picking it up. It looked old, older than me, older than Charlie's house. The scrap of paper had something written on it in pencil, and I squinted to read it. Charlie's handwriting, that crooked scrawl I knew so well from all the Christmas cards and birthday letters he'd sent me over the years. Jimmy, the note read, if anyone tries to take your land, open the lockbox in my study. Don't wait, and don't tell anyone about it. I've been saving this for you for 40 years. Trust me. I felt my throat tighten and my eyes get hot. 40 years. Charlie had been planning something for 40 years, and I'd never known a thing about it. I looked up at the lawyer, and I must have had a strange look on my face because he put his hand on my ARM and said, Mr. H.A. Risen, are you all right? No, I said, picking up the key and holding it in my palm. It was heavier than it looked. No, I'm not all right at all. I'm about to find out what my best friend was hiding from me for almost half a century. The lawyer nodded and stood up, leaving his CARD on the table. Call me if you need any help with the legal side of things. Charlie paid my fees in advance, so it won't cost you a thing. He was very specific about that. After he left, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, just turning that key over and over in my hand. Duke came over and laid his head on my knee, looking up at me with his sad old eyes. I didn't have any answers for him. I didn't have any answers for myself, but I knew one thing for sure. I was going to drive over to Charlie's house and open that lockbox, whatever was in it. Bill Tompkins could put all the survey stakes he wanted in my pasture, but he couldn't stop me from finding out what my oldest friend had left behind for me. I grabbed my jacket and my truck keys and headed out the door, the key clutched in my fist like a talisman against the dark. It was a Tuesday morning, and my whole life was about to change, though I didn't know it yet. All I knew was that Charley had said to trust him, and in 40 years of friendship, he'd never once led me wrong. That the drive to Charley's house took 15 minutes, through fields still wet with dew and past the old oak tree where we'd say, read our initials, when we were just kids back from the war, young and red and full of dreams we didn't know how to hold on to. I parked my truck in front of his little house, which was already rooting to look neglected with nobody living in it. The lawn was overgrown, and the porch had a new coat of dust that made me sad to see. I let myself in with the key Charley had given me years ago, the one I'd kept on my keychain all this time without really thinking about it. The house smelled musty and empty, the way places do when nobody's been there for a while. I walked through the living room, past the familiar our old furniture and the photos on the walls of Charley's parents and his brother, who'd died in Korea. I went into the study, where his desk was still covered with papers and legal books. I knelt down on the worn repet and felt the floorboard RDS beneath it. There was a loose one NEA or the Basibo ARD, and I pried it up to reveal a small metal box, old and rusted, just like the key. My HRT was pounding so loud I could hear it in my EARS as I fit the key into the lock and turned it. The box opened with a creak. Inside, there was a thick stack of papers, yellowed and typed on old-fashioned legal forms. I took them out carefully and spread them on Charley's desk, squinting at the fine print and the legal jargon that it took me a long time to understand what I was reading. At first, I thought it was a mistake, some kind of joke Charley was playing on me from beyond the grave. But the more I read, the more it root to make a terrifying kind of sense. These weren't just any legal documents. They were deeds. Hundreds of deeds, covering almost every parcel of land in the county, including the very plot where the county courthouse stood, the police station, and the brand new house that belonged to the county judge. And on every single one of those deeds, in the same legal language, my name was listed as the property owner. That my hands were shaking so bad I had to sit down. I looked around Charley's study, at his books and his papers and his old worn chair, and I thought about all the years he'd spent working quietly away, doing God knows what to make this happen. And I thought about how he'd never said a word about any of it, just kept his secret until he knew I'd need it the most. The survey stake in my pasture. Bill Tompkins and his rezoning plan. The county trying to steal my land. Charley had known it would happen, or at least he'd been ready for it. And now, with these papers in my hand, I had more than just a defense. I had a weapon. I folded the deeds up carefully and put them back in the lockbox. Then I took the box out to my truck and drove home, my mind racing with all the implications. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was high and the survey stake was still sticking out of the ground like a challenge. That I looked at it and smiled for the first time in months. "All right, Bill," I said to nobody but myself. "You wanted a fight, you got one. But this time, you're going to find out who you're really messing with." And I walked into my house, clutching the lockbox full of deeds, feeling like an old warrior who'd just been given one more chance to charge into battle. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with all that power, but I knew one thing for sure. Charley had my back, even from the grave. That was the kind of friend he was. And I wasn't going to let his gift go to waste. Old friends never really leave you. They just find new ways to help you when you need them most. I spent the rest of that day in my kitchen with the lockbox open on the table, going through every single page of those deeds one by one. Duke lay at my feet, snoring softly, while the afternoon sun moved across the floor and the shadows grew long. I'd never been much of a reader. In school, I'd be a rely scraped through, more interested in working with my hands than with books. But that afternoon, I read like my life depended on it, because in a way, it did. The deeds were organized by date, going all the way back to Yichiba. That was just a few years after Charley and I came back from Vietnam, when we were both still young and trying to figure out how to live normal lives again. I remembered those years as a blur of odd jobs and cheap beer, of trying to forget things that didn't want to be forgotten. Charley had gone to law school at night, while working as a clerk during the day. I'd taken over my father's farm and tried to make something of it. Neither one of us had any money back then. We were just two broken-down vets trying to make do. But somewhere along the way, Charlie had sta root buying up land. Small parcels at first, abandoned lots and tax-delinquent properties that nobody else wanted. He'd done it through some kind of trust, using a name I didn't recognize, some shell company that made it look like the purchases were coming from a non-profit foundation. The first deed was for a tiny strip of land NEA or the old railway depot. Charlie had bought it for $400 RS in 1979. $400 RS. That was a lot of money back then, but even so, it was cheap. The land was worthless at the time, just weeds and gravel and a collapsed shed. But now that railway depot was the center of the new commercial district, and that little strip of land was worth more than $100,000 RS. I flipped through page after page, watching the pattern emerge. Charlie had been methodical, almost obsessive. He'd bought property on the edges of town first, then worked his way INWA Road. He'd bought the land under the old feed store, the RDWA Re store, the BA Rubber shop. He'd bought the lots behind the church, the field next to the high school, the wooded array along the creek where kids went to drink beer and make out. He'd bought the land that the county later built its new administration building on, and the land that the developers had turned into the shopping plaza. In 1985, Charlie had bought the parcel that later became the county courthouse annex. He'd paid $6,000 RS for it. The county had leased it from the trust for $1 or a year, thinking they were getting a sweet deal. But the deed made it clear that the trust retained all ownership rights. The county was just a tenant, and now those rights belonged to me. The last batch of deeds was the most recent, from the late 1990s and early 2000s. That was when the county had sta root growing, when all the development had begun. Charlie had been right there, quietly buying up every piece of land that was about to become valuable, always through the trust, always with that same seriful anonymity. And then there were the deeds that really made my jaw drop. The judge's house, the one on Oak Street with the big pool and the manicured lawn. Charlie had bought that land in 1993, long before the judge had built there. The judge had signed a long-term lease without ever knowing who the real owner was. The police station, the fire station, even the parking lot behind the county office building. All of it, owned by the same trust, and all of it now transferred to me. I sat back in my chair and rubbed my eyes. My head was spinning with numbers and dates and legal terms I understood. But the bottom line was clear or enough. I owned half the county. I owned the ground under Bill Tompkins' office, under the judge's swimming pool, under every restaurant and store and government building in town. I could shut this whole county down if I wanted to. I could make Bill Tompkins and his friends beg for mercy. The question was, what was I going to do with all that power? I thought about Charlie again, about what he'd intended when he put all this together. He hadn't done it to make me rich, that was for sure. If he'd wanted that, he'd have just written me a check and been done with it. No, this was something else. This was about protection. Charlie had seen what was coming, the way the county was going to grow and change and push people like me out. He'd seen the developers coming with their money and their plans, and he'd decided to build a wall against them. And he'd done it all without telling me, without asking for my help or my opinion. That was just like Charlie. He always thought he had to carry the load alone, that he had to be the one to fix things while everyone else went about their business. It was noble in its way, but it also made me sad. He'd spent 40 years working on this, and I'd never known. I'd never been able to thank him or help him or even just sit with him while he made his plans. That I looked at the clock on the wall and realized it was NEARLY to RK outside. I'd been sitting at that table for hours, lost in the papers. Duke was whining softly, wanting his dinner. I got up and fed him, then made myself a sandwich and a cup of coffee. My hands were still shaking a little, and I couldn't seem to settle down. I needed to think. I needed to figure out my next move. That's when I heard the CA are pulling into the driveway. It was too late for visitors, and the sound of it was wrong for a county truck. I went to the window and peered through the curtain, and my heart sank. It was Bill Tompkins' Cadillac, the shiny red one that he drove around town like he was the mayor himself. And he wasn't alone. Susan was with him, and I could see her leaning forward in the passenger seat, her face alight with anticipation. They were coming to push me, to force my hand. They probably thought that with the survey stake already in place, I'd be ready to cave, to sign whatever papers they put in front of me. They brought their lawyers with them too. A whole raven of shiny RS pulling up behind Bill's Cadillac. I counted 3 other vehicles, all with tinted windows and out-of-state plates, that I felt a surge of anger so strong it made my vision go red at the edges. They were coming to take my land, my home, my family's legacy. They were coming to push an old man out of the way so they could make a quick buck. And they were doing it with lawyers and contracts and all the official trappings that made it look legitimate. Well, let them come. Let them bring all the lawyers they wanted. I had something better than lawyers. I had 40 RS of Cha-Rely CA refill planning, and I had enough deeds to turn this whole county upside down. That I waited until they were all out of their CARS and approaching my front door. Susan was in the lead, her face arranged in that fake, sympathetic expression she always wore when she was about to ask for something. She was wearing a pink pantsuit and too much perfume, the kind that gave me a headache. Bill was right behind her, looking smug in his expensive suit, his guts straining against the buttons. The lawyers were hanging back, CA-ring their briefcases and looking important. "Jimmy, DAR," Susan called out as she came up the steps. "I hope we're not interrupting your dinner. Bill and I just wanted to have a little chat, a family chat, about what's best for everyone." I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. Duke came with me, growling low in his throat. He always did have good instincts when it came to people. "Susan," I said, keeping my voice flat. "Bill, you're a little late for a social call." "Oh, it's not social," Bill said, pushing past Susan to stand in front of me. He was shorter than me, but he puffed out his chest like he was trying to make up for it. "It's business, Jim. We need to settle this land thing once and for all. I've got the developer waiting in the CAR, and he's ready to make you a very fair offer." I looked past Bill at the line of CARS in my driveway. The developer was probably one of those slick city types who'd never set foot on a FARM in his life. He'd be wearing an expensive watch and shoes that cost more than my truck. He'd smile and call me sir, and try to sweet-talk me into signing away everything I owned. "Let me guess," I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out my pipe. I took my time packing it, watching Bill's face get redder and redder with each second of delay. "You've got some paperwork drawn up, and all I have to do is sign on the dotted line. Something about a big check and a promise that everything will be taken care of." "Something like that," Bill said, his voice tight. "Look, Jim, I know you're not the sharpest tool in the shed when it comes to business matters. That's why Susan and I have been trying to help you. We're family, after all. We want what's best for you." I lit my pipe and took a long draw, letting the smoke drift out slowly. "Is that right? And what exactly do you think is best for me?" Susan stepped forward, her eyes all wide and innocent. "Jimmy, honey, you can't keep working this FARM forever. Your back is bad, and it's just too much for a man your age. We've found a developer who's willing to give you top dollar for the property, more than enough to live on for the rest of your life. You could move to a nice APA, maybe even down to Florida where it's WARM. You wouldn't have to worry about anything ever again." It was a good pitch, I'll give her that. She'd been practicing it, probably rehearsing it in front of the mirror. The CA-ring niece, looking out for her poor old uncle. But I knew her better than that. I knew the greed behind those pretty words, the hunger for money that had driven her and Bill to pressure me for RS, Florida, I said, letting the word hang in the air. "That's what you want for me. A nice little APA where I can sit and watch the TV and wait to die. And you and Bill get to build your shopping mall on my land, making millions while I rot in some condo." Bill's face flushed an ugly red. "Now see here, Jim, that's not fair. We're trying to help you. We could have just let the county take the land through eminent domain, but we wanted to give you a chance to make a profit. You should be grateful." "Grateful?" I repeated the word like it tasted bad. "You want me to be grateful that you've been scheming to steal my FARM for the past 10 years? You want me to thank you for putting a survey stake in my pasture without even asking my permission? You want me to be grateful that you brought a wholesale load of lawyers to my house at night, trying to bully an old man into giving up everything he owns?" Susan's face went pale, but Bill was beyond CA-ring about APA Rancis. He stepped closer to me, jabbing his finger in my direction. "Listen here, you stubborn old fool. We're not asking. We're telling. The county has already approved the rezoning, and my lawyers assure me that we can force you out one way or another. You can either take the deal and walk away with something, or you can fight us and lose everything. Those are your choices." I let him finish. Then I took a long drag on my pipe and blew the smoke right in his face. He sputtered and coughed, but I was already turning away, walking back into my house. "Wait here," I said over my shoulder. "I've got something to show you." I went inside and grabbed the lockbox from the kitchen table. I ride it out to the porch and set it down on the wooden railing, right in front of Bill and Susan and their gaggle of lawyers. The developers had gotten out of their cars too, a couple of smooth-faced men in expensive overcoats who were watching the scene with interest. "What's this?" Bill asked, eyeing the old metal box suspiciously. "Some kind of joke." "No joke," I said. I lifted the lid and pulled out the topmost deed, the one for the county courthouse annex. I held it up so Bill could see the header, the official seal, the legal language that made it binding. "You remember Charlie Mitchell, don't you, Bill? My best friend who passed away 2 months ago. Well, he left me a little something in his will. A gift, you might say. A way to protect myself against people like you." Bill squinted at the paper, trying to read it in the fading light. His face went from confused to skeptical to something that looked almost like fear. "That's not real," he said, his voice rising. "That's a forgery. It has to be." "It's real enough," I said. I pulled out another deed, and another, stacking them on the railing like a deck of RDS. "You see, Bill, Charlie spent 40 years buying up land all over this county. Every time a parcel came up for sale, he snapped it up. Small lots, mostly. Places nobody thought were valuable. But over time, they added up. And every single one of these deeds, every single piece of property, was put into a trust that was set up to transfer to me upon his death." I watched Susan's face crumple as the implications root to sink in. She grabbed Bill's arm, digging her fingers into his expensive suit. "Bill, what is he talking about? What's in those papers?" "Your office, Bill," I said, picking up one of the deeds and waving it in his face. "The county planning department where you've been working all these years. Charlie bought that building back in 1982. He's been your landlord all this time, and you never knew it. And now I'm the landlord. The parking lot where you park your fancy Cadillac. That's mine too. The judge's house, the police station, the fire station, every major piece of county property in this town. All of it belongs to me now." Bill was backing away, shaking his head like he was trying to deny what he was seeing. "That's impossible. That can't be legal. No one person can own that much property. It's against the law." "It's perfectly legal," I said, enjoying the look of panic spreading across his face. Charlie checked every detail with the best lawyers he could find. "It's all been filed and recorded and stamped by the county. You can check the records yourself if you don't believe me. But I think you already know I'm telling the truth." One of the developers stepped forward, his face suddenly serious. "Mr. Risen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're prepared to offer you a very generous sum for your property. Whatever Bill Tompkins promised you, we can double it, triple it. Name your price." I looked at the developer, this smooth-talking city man who thought money could solve anything. "You're not listening," I said. "I don't want to sell. I never wanted to sell. Charlie set this up so I wouldn't have to sell, so I could protect my land from people like you. And now I've got the means to do exactly that." The developer's face hardened. "You don't understand, old man. We've got investors, commitments. This project is already in motion. You can't just stop it." "Watch me," I said. I reached into the lockbox and pulled out the deed to the judge's house. "You know what this is? This is the land where Judge Risen lives. The judge who's been on your side all along, approving your deals and signing off on your permits. Well, guess what? His house sits on land that I own, and I'm considering having it torn down." The silence that followed was absolute. Bill read at me with his mouth open. Susan had gone white as a sheet, and even the lawyers were standing frozen, their briefcases dangling uselessly at their sides. "Now," I said, closing the lockbox and tucking it under my arm, "I think it's time for all of you to leave my property. I've had a long day, and I'm tired. But before you go, Bill, I want you to understand something. You and your wife have been plotting against me for years, and I've let it slide because you're family. But family doesn't try to steal from each other. Family doesn't bring lawyers to an old man's house to pressure him into giving up his land. Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated me. I pointed at the survey stake still standing in my pasture. You're going to take that stake out of my ground yourself tomorrow morning, and then you're going to resign from the planning department by the end of the week. If you don't, I'm going to release these deeds to the public and let everyone in this county know who really owns their homes and their businesses and their government buildings. I'll make sure your name is dragged through the mud so thoroughly that you won't be able to show your face in this town ever again. Bill's eyes to root day round, looking for support from his lawyers, from his wife, from anyone. But nobody was meeting his gaze. Even Susan had stepped back, looking at me with a mixture of awe and fear. You can't do this, Bill said, his voice a rely above a whisper. You can't ruin me. I've got a reputation, a CA rear. I've worked too hard to let you take it all away. Then you know what you have to do, I said. Now get off my property. All of you. They left, slinking back to their cars like whipped dogs. The developers were already on their phones, probably trying to figure out how to salvage their deal. Bill drove off in his Cadillac with Susan huddled in the passenger seat, not looking back. I watched them go, feeling a sense of satisfaction that I hadn't felt in years. When the last set of taillights read down the road, I went back inside and put the lockbox in a safe place. Duke was waiting for me by the fire, and I sat down in my old A-room chair and let out a long breath. My heart was still pounding, and my hands were still shaking, but underneath all that was something I hadn't felt in a long time, the hope that word travels fast in a small county, especially when it's the kind of news that makes people's jaws drop. By the time I woke up the next morning, I'd already had 3 phone calls from neighbors who'd heard about Bill Tompkins' late-night visit to my place. The story had gotten twisted, as stories always do, but the gist of it was the same. Old Jim H.A. Risen had come into some kind of windfall, and Bill Tompkins had left my farm looking like he'd seen a ghost. I wasn't in any hurry to set the record straight. Let people talk. Let them wonder. I had more important things to worry about, like the phone call I was expecting from Judge H.A. Risen. He called just after breakfast, while I was sitting on the porch with my coffee and my pipe, watching the fog burn off the fields. Duke was stretched out at my feet, while remaining his old bones in the morning sun. It was a peaceful scene, the kind I'd enjoyed 1,000 times before, but everything felt different now. The land under my feet, the fields stretching out to the horizon, the road leading into town. All of it ride a different weight now that I knew what I knew. Jim. The voice on the other end of the line was smooth and practiced, the voice of a man used to being in control. This is H.A. Risen. Judge H.A. Risen. I believe we need to have a conversation. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't a request. It was the kind of statement you made when you expected the other person to jump. Most people in this county jumped when Judge H.A. Risen spoke. He was the most powerful man in the county, the man who decided who won and who lost in the courtroom, the man who had the EA of every politician and businessman within 100 miles. But I wasn't most people, and I wasn't jumping for anybody to judge, I said, taking a slow drag on my pipe. I was wondering when you'd call. I figured Bill would have been on the phone to you as soon as he got home last night. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence that told me I'd scored a point. Bill Tompkins is a fool, the judge said finally. He's always been a fool, and I should have known better than to let him drag me into this mess. But the fact remains, Jim, that we have a situation. And I think it would be in everyone's best interest if we resolved it quietly and amicably. I took another puff on my pipe and let the smoke drift out slowly. I'm listening. Good. Then you'll meet me at my office this afternoon. 2 o'clock. We'll have a cup of coffee and talk this through like civilized men. I'm sure we can find a solution that works for everyone involved. I thought about it for a moment, weighing my options. I could refuse, make him come to me. But something told me that the judge was the kind of man who needed to feel like he was in charge, even when he wasn't. If I met him on his turf, he'd be more likely to let his guard down. I'll be there, I said, but I'm bringing my lawyer with me. Lawyer, the judge's voice sharpened. Jim, I don't think we need to involve lawyers in this. This is a simple matter between 2 gentlemen. You've got a whole office full of lawyers, I said. You don't think I'm going to walk into that building without some legal protection, do you? Besides, it's the lawyer who's handling Charlie's estate. He's the one who knows all the details of those deeds. You'll want him there anyway. The judge was silent for a long moment. I could almost hear him thinking, running through the Chino Rios, trying to find an angle. Finally, he spoke again, his voice tight and controlled. Fine, bring your lawyer. But I want RN you, Jim. I've been on this bench for 25 years, and I know every lawyer in this county. Whoever you bring, I can find a way to make him see reason. We'll see about that, I said. 2 o'clock. I'll be there. I hung up the phone and sat for a moment. STA rang out at the fields. Duke lifted his head and looked at me with his old, knowing eyes. Well, boy, I said, reaching down to scratch his ERS. I guess we're going to see what the judge has to say. Getting ready for a meeting with the county's most powerful man wasn't something I did every day. I put on my best shirt, the one I usually saved for funerals and weddings, and a pair of clean trousers that weren't too frayed at the cuffs. I shaved for the first time in 3 days, making sure to get the tricky spot under my chin that always gave me trouble. When I looked in the mirror, I saw an old man with tired eyes and a face weathered by years of sun and wind. But I also saw something else, something I hadn't seen in a long time. A spark of determination. Thomas Hudson, the lawyer, met me in the parking lot outside the courthouse. He was dressed in his usual Shaw RP suit, looking like he'd just stepped out of a magazine. But there was something different about him today. A new respect in his eyes when he looked at me. Mr. H.A. Risen, he said, shaking my hand firmly. I heard about what happened last night. I must say, you handled yourself quite well. Just told them the truth, I said. That's all. Sometimes the truth is the most powerful weapon you can have. He glanced up at the courthouse building, its old stone facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. Judge H.A. Risen is a formidable opponent. He's been running this county for longer than most people can remember. He's not going to give up his power easily. Neither am I said. Let's go see what he has to say. The judge's office was on the second floor, a big corner room with windows that looked out over the town SQA. It was the kind of office that was designed to intimidate, with the arcade wood paneling and heavy furniture and a massive desk that made the person sitting behind it look like a king on his throne. The judge was behind that desk when we walked in, leaning back in his leather chair with his hands folded over his stomach. He was a big man, the judge, with a shock of white hair and a ruddy face that spoke of good living. He wore a suit that cost more than my truck, and his shoes gleamed like mirrors. When he smiled, it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Jim, he said, waving us to the chairs in front of his desk. And Mr. Hudson, please sit. Can I get you some coffee? Thank you, Judge, I said, taking a seat. I'll pass on the coffee. Had enough already this morning. The judge's smile didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Of course. Well, then, let's get down to business. I understand you've come into possession of some unusual property documents. Deeds, I'm told. Correct, I said. Charlie Mitchell left them to me. A sort of insurance policy, I think he called it. Charlie Mitchell. The judge said the name like it left a bad taste in his mouth. That man was always a thorn in my side. Always finding loopholes. Always digging up old laws that nobody had used in decades. But I have to admit, I never expected him to pull something like this. He was a good friend, I said. The best I ever had. He wanted to make sure I was protected. And so he left you a collection of deeds that could bring this county to its knees. The judge leaned four-way RD, his eyes boring into mine. Let me be frank with you, Jim. Those deeds, if they become public knowledge, would cause chaos. People would lose their homes, their businesses, their sense of security. The county would be thrown into a legal mess that could take years to sort out. I don't think that's what Charlie wanted. You don't know what Charlie wanted, I said. He didn't tell you anything because he didn't trust you. And frankly, I don't trust you either. The judge's face tightened. That's a strong accusation. I've been a public servant in this county for over 40 years. I've done more for this community than you'll ever know. I know about the deals you made with Bill Tompkins, I said. I know about the rezoning that was pushed through without proper notice. I know about the developers who've been buying up land and getting your approval on every single project, no questions asked. I know what you've been building here, and it doesn't have anything to do with serving the public. The judge's composure cracked, just for a moment. His face went red, and his hands tightened on the arms of his chair. You're talking about things you don't understand. I understand enough, I said. I understand that you and your friends have been running this county like a private club. I understand that you've been using your position to enrich yourself and your cronies at the expense of people like me. and I understand that all of that is about to come to an end. Mr. Hudson Clea read his throat and pulled a folder out of his briefcase. Judge H.A. Risen. I've read a summary of the property holdings that now belong to Mr. H.A. Risen. As you can see, they include the land beneath this courthouse, the police station, the fire station, and, of course, your personal residence. In total, Mr. H.A. Risen now holds title to approximately 47 distinct parcels of land within the county limits. The Judge STA read at the folder like it was a live snake. This is insane. No single person should have that kind of power. And yet, here we are, I said. Now, I didn't come here to threaten you or to cause chaos. That's not who I am. But I also didn't come here to be pushed around. I've had enough of that. So here's what I'm offering. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the edge of his desk. I'm willing to keep all of these deeds quiet. I'm willing to let things continue as they are, with the county leasing the land from me for the same terms Charlie set up. I won't raise the rents, I won't try to evict anyone, and I won't make a public spectacle out of any of this. The judge's eyes narrowed. And in return, I want your guarantee that my FARM will never be rezoned or taken away from me. I want the planning department to leave me alone, and I want Bill Tompkins out of his job. He and his wife will never set foot on my property again, and they'll never try to interfere with my business. If they do, everything goes public. The judge sat back in his chair, his face unreadable. That's it, that's all you want. That's all I ever wanted, I said. I never asked to be rich. I never asked to have power over the county. I just wanted to be left alone to live my life and work my land. Charlie knew that. That's why he set this up the way he did. For a long moment, the judge just STA read at me. I could see him weighing his options, trying to find a way around what I'd proposed. But there was no way around it. I held all the cards, and he knew it. Bill Tompkins is a useful idiot, the judge said finally. He has his uses, but he's not essential. I can make sure he's gone by the end of the week. And your FARM, I'll see to it personally that it's protected from any future development. You have my word. Good, I said, standing up. Then we have an agreement. Mr. Hudson will draw up the paperwork and make sure everything is properly documented. The judge stood too, his face still tight with contained anger. You've played this very well, Jim. I have to give you credit. You're a lot sharper than you look. I've had good teachers, I said. The best. I walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter than I had in Yaris. The sun was on my face, and the town looked beautiful in the afternoon light. People were going about their business, shopping and chatting and living their lives, completely unaware of what had just happened behind those stone walls. Mr. Hudson fell into step beside me. That went better than I expected. I thought he'd fight Howrider. He's a SMART man, I said. He knows when he's beaten. He'll make sure Bill takes the fall, and he'll save his own skin. That's the way people like him operate. And what about the rest of the property, the county buildings, the businesses, the judge's house? You really going to let them keep leasing from you? I thought about it for a moment. For now, yes. I don't need to disrupt people's lives. They didn't do anything wrong. They just happened to live and work on land that Charlie bought years ago. But I'll tell you one thing, Mr. Hudson. From now on, things are going to be different in this county. People like Bill Tompkins and Judge H.A. Risen aren't going to have the same power they used to. And that's exactly how Charlie would have wanted it. We parked ways in the parking lot, and I drove home with the windows down and the wind in my hair. Duke was waiting for me on the porch, just like always, his tail thumping against the wooden boa RDS when he saw my truck. Well, boy, I said, settling into my chair beside him. It looks like we're going to be okay. I sat there for a long time, watching the sun sink toward the horizon and thinking about everything that had happened. It was strange how quickly things could change. A week ago, I was a lonely old man on the verge of losing everything. Now I was the most powerful person in the county, with the means to protect not just myself, but everyone I read about. But the thing I felt most wasn't power or triumph. It was gratitude. Gratitude for Charlie, for his foresight and his love, for the way he'd looked out for me even after he was gone. He'd spent 40 years building a wall around me, and I hadn't even known it. That was the kind of friend he was. The phone rang, jolting me out of my thoughts. It was Susan, her voice shrill and panicked. Jimmy, You have to call off Bill. The judge called him and told him he's being fired. He's out of his mind with rage, talking about suing the county and exposing everyone. You can't do this to us. We're family. I'm not doing anything, I said calmly. I'm just protecting what's mine. Bill brought this on himself. If he'd left me alone, none of this would have happened. You're destroying him. You're destroying our whole family. I let out a long sigh. Susan, your family was destroyed a long time ago. The day you and Bill decided that money was more important than loyalty, that's when you lost what mattered. I'm sorry it came to this, but I'm not going to apologize for standing up for myself. She sta root crying then, loud sobs that crackled over the phone line. I let her cry for a moment. Then I said, tell Bill he still has a chance. If he resigns quietly and stays away from me, I won't make things worse than they already are. But if he keeps fighting, if he keeps trying to hurt me, I'll make sure he can't even get a job sweeping floors in this county. That's the only offer he's going to get. I hung up before she could say anything else. I didn't feel good about it, not really. Susan was my wife's sister, and I had loved her once, back when we were all younger and everything was simpler. But that was a long time ago, and she'd made her choices just as I'd made mine. The next morning, there was a letter in my mailbox from the county planning department. Bill Tompkins had tendered his resignation, effective immediately. There was no apology, no explanation. Just a brief note saying he was stepping down for personal reasons. I read the letter twice, then folded it up and put it in the drawer with the deeds. Somewhere out there, Bill and Susan were packing their things and making plans to leave town. I didn't know where they'd go, and I didn't much see a re. They were gone, and that was all that mattered. I walked out to my pasture and looked at the field stretching out before me. The survey stake was gone, pulled up by Bill himself, just like I'd demanded. The land was mine again, and this time, nobody was going to take it. I thought about Charlie, about the last time we'd sat together on his porch, drinking whiskey and watching the sunset. He'd known what was coming, I realized now. He'd known that the county was going to change, that people like Bill were going to try to take what didn't belong to them. And he'd spent his life making sure I had the tools to fight back. You crazy old fool, I whispered, looking up at the sky. You never did anything simple, did you? You had to make it all complicated and legal and secret. But I guess that's just who you were. The wind rustled through the cornfields, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I heard him laughing. The week that followed was the strangest of my life. I'd spent nearly 50 years as a fa remer, a man of routine and habit, waking before dawn and working until the sun went down. But now I found myself in a position I'd never imagined, with more power and money than I knew what to do with, and nothing but time on my hands. The first thing I did was hire Mr. Hudson to help me sort through the legal mess that Charlie had left behind. There were tax issues to deal with, property records to update, and a mountain of paperwork that made my head spin just looking at it. Mr. Hudson handled it all with calm efficiency, bringing me documents to sign and explaining things in plain English when I got confused. You're going to be a very wealthy man, Mr. H.A. Risen, he told me one afternoon, spreading a series of spreadsheets across my kitchen table. The rental income alone from these properties is substantial, and the land values have increased dramatically since Charlie first purchased them. If you ever wanted to sell, you could command top dollar. I shook my head. I'm not selling anything. Charlie didn't set this up so I could get rich. He did it to protect the land, to keep it from being swallowed up by developers and politicians. I'm not going to undo all his work just to line my pockets. Mr. Hudson nodded, a look of approval in his eyes. That's what I thought you'd say. But you should know that you have options. You could set up a foundation, maybe use some of the income to support local causes. Charities, community projects, things that Charlie would have approved of. I thought about that. Charlie had always been a quiet giver, never wanting recognition for the help he gave to people in need. He'd paid for kids' college tuition anonymously, helped struggling families keep their homes, and never once let anyone know it was him. Maybe I could continue that work, CARRY on his legacy in a way that honored his memory. That's a good idea, I said. Let's look into setting something up. But first, I need to take CARRY of something else. The something else was Judge H.A. Risen. I'd made a deal with him, but I wasn't naive enough to think he'd keep his word forever. Men like him didn't change their ways just because they got caught once. They'd find a new angle, a new scheme, and they'd be back at it as soon as they thought the coast was clear I needed to make sure he understood that the deal was permanent, that there would be consequences if he ever tried to break it. I went to see him at his office again, this time without Mr. Hudson. I wanted to do this alone, man to man. The judge was surprised to see me, but he recovered quickly, waving me into the same big chair where I'd sat before. "Jim," he said, his voice ruefully neutral. "This is an unexpected visit. Is there something we need to discuss? I've been thinking about our arrangement," I said. "About the land under your house, specifically." The judge's face tightened, but he kept his voice level. "What about it?" "I'm willing to keep things as they are," I said. "But I want something in return. Something that will guarantee you don't try to pull any more tricks." The judge leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "I'm listening. You're going to use your position to help the people of this county. No more backroom deals with developers. No more favorable rulings for your friends. You're going to be the judge you always pretended to be, the one who's fair and impartial and serves the public good." The judge laughed, a short, humorless sound. "And if I refuse?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Then I released this to the newspapers. It's a list of every property I own in this county, including the one under your house, along with a statement explaining how you've been using your position to benefit yourself and your friends at the expense of the people you're supposed to serve." The judge's face went pale. "You wouldn't agree. The chaos that would cause would be entirely on your head," I said. "I've tried to do this quietly, to give you a chance to save face. But if you force my hand, I won't hesitate. The only thing that's kept me from going public already is my respect for Charlie's memory. He didn't want a war. He just wanted justice." The judge was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the paper in my hand. Finally, he spoke, his voice rely above a whisper. "You're a hard man, Jim H.A. Risen. A lot harder than you look." "I've had a hard life," I said. "It tends to make you that way." He nodded slowly, a resigned look settling on his face. "Fine, I'll do what you ask. But you have to understand, things already changing in this county. The developers aren't going to just go away. They'll find other ways to get what they want. That's their problem," I said. "And if they come after me or anyone else, I'll be ready for them." I left the judge's office feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and weariness. I'd won, but the victory felt hollow somehow. I'd spent my whole life trying to be a good man, to work hard and treat people fairly. And now I found myself in a position where I had to threaten and bully just to keep what was mine. But I knew it was the right thing to do. Charlie had trusted me with this power, and I had to use it wisely. The news of Bill Tompkins' downfall spread quickly through the county. By the end of the week, everyone knew that the planning department had a new director and that the Tompkins family had packed up and moved to another state. Susan called me once more, begging me to change my mind, but I told her the same thing I'd told her before. Bill had made his choices, and now he had to live with them. "I'll never forgive you for this, Jimmy," she said, her voice cold and bitter. "You've destroyed my family." "I didn't destroy anything," I said. "You and Bill did that all on your own. I just refused to let you destroy me too." She hung up without saying goodbye, and I knew I'd probably never hear from her again. Part of me was sad about that. She was my wife's sister, and I had loved her. But the sad part of me was small, easily pushed aside by the anger I felt at the way they'd treated me. That I spent the next few weeks getting my life back in order. The farm needed work, the fence needed mending, and the corn was ready for harvest. I hired some local kids to help me with the heavy lifting, paying them more than the going rate because I remembered what it was like to be young and broke and hungry for work. The kids were good workers, respectful, and eager to learn. One of them, a boy named Tommy, reminded me of myself at that age. He had the same quiet determination, the same way of pushing through pain without complaint. I found myself taking a liking to him, showing him the tricks of the trade that my father had shown me. "Your farm's nice, Mr. H.A. Risen," Tommy said one afternoon, mopping his brow after a long day of hauling hay bales. "My granddad used to have a place like this, but he sold it when I was little. Said it was too much work for an old man." "He was probably right," I said. "Farming is hard work. It'll wear you out if you're not reeful. But it's honest work, and that counts for something." Tommy nodded, looking out over the fields. "Do you think I could have a farm someday like this?" I thought about it for a moment. "I don't see why not. But you'll need to work hard and save your money. And you'll need to be smart about it, too. Don't let anyone push you around or try to take advantage of you. That's what my dad says, Tommy said. He says there's too many people in this world who'll try to cheat you if you let him. I smiled, remembering Charlie's words from so many years ago. He's a smart man, your dad. You should listen to him. The days grew shorter as autumn approached, and the nights grew solar. I root spending more time indoors, sitting by the fire with Duke and reading the old books that Charlie had left me in his will. Most of them were legal texts, dry and boring, but there were a few novels too. Doggy read and marked up with his notes in the margins. I found a letter tucked inside one of them, a yellowed envelope with my name on it in Charlie's handwriting. I opened it carefully, my hands trembling slightly. Jimmy, the letter began. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you've found the deeds. I hope you're not too mad at me for keeping all this a secret. I know I should have told you, but I was afraid you'd try to talk me out of it. You always did have too much pride to accept help from anyone. I smiled at that. He'd known me better than I knew myself. I'm not going to pretend to understand what you're going through, the letter continued. Losing MA without was hard, I know, but you've got strength in you that you don't even realize. You always have. I've seen it, in Vietnam and all the years after. You just needed someone to remind you. I paused, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. Charlie had been so many things to me. Friend, brother, confidant. And now, even from beyond the grave, he was still there for me. Don't waste this, the letter said. Don't let what I've given you become a burden. Use it to make things right, to protect yourself and the people who matter. And don't forget to live your life. You've got a lot of years left, Jimmy. Find something to enjoy, something to look forward to. That's what I'd want for you. The letter ended there, just a simple line of love from a friend who'd never had the right words. I folded it up and put it in my pocket, next to the old safe key that had rooted all. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I got in my truck and drove to the county fair. It was a silly thing, maybe, but Charlie would have approved. He'd always loved the fair, the sights and sounds and smells of it. He used to drag me along every year, making me try the funnel cakes and watch the pig races. I walked through the fairgrounds, taking it all in. The rides were spinning, the kids were laughing, and the smell of popcorn and cotton candy filled the air. I bought myself a lemonade and sat on a bench, watching the people go by. That's when I saw her. A woman about my age, with silver hair and kind eyes, sitting alone at a table are the food stalls. She had a plate of nachos in front of her, but she wasn't eating them. She was just sitting there, looking out at the crowd with a wistful expression. I don't know what came over me, but I walked over to her table and sat down. She looked up, surprised, but not unfriendly. Mind if I join you? I asked. She shrugged. It's a free country. We root talking, just small talk at first. She told me her name was Ellen, that she was a widow, that she'd come to the fair alone because her grandchildren were all too busy to take her. She said she didn't mind, that she liked being on her own sometimes. I know what you mean, I said. I've been alone for a long time. But I'm rooting to think maybe I've been alone too long. She looked at me with those kind eyes, and something in her expression made my heart skip a beat. Are you asking me out, Mr. H.A. Risen? I don't know, I said, laughing. Maybe I am. Is that okay? She smiled then, a real smile that lit up her whole face. I think that's the nicest thing anyone said to me in years. We spent the rest of the day together, wandering through the fair, eating too much junk food, laughing at the terrible rides. It was strange and wonderful, the first time in years that I'd felt truly alive. Thank you for today, Ellen said as we parted ways in the parking lot. I needed it more than I realized. Me too, I said. I'd like to see you again, if you're open to it. She smiled and gave me her number. I'd like that. I drove home that night with a lightness in my heart that I hadn't felt since May Ritha was alive. Duke was waiting on the porch as always, and I sat down beside him, patting his head. I think things might be rooting to turn around, I said to him. At least, I hope so. Duke wagged his tail and leaned his head against my knee. In his own way, I think he understood. I asked Ellen out the very next day. It felt foolish at my age, calling a woman I knew and asking her to dinner. But I'd been foolish all my life in one way or another, and I figured one more time couldn't hurt. She said yes without hesitation, which surprised me almost as much as it delighted me that we met at a little diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where the coffee is always hot and the waitresses call you honey. I'd been going there for 30 years, but I'd never noticed how nice the lights were, or how the jukebox played songs that made you want to tap your feet. That night, everything seemed different, brighter somehow. Ellen sat across from me in the booth and told me about her life, her husband who'd passed away 5 years ago, her children who'd moved to the city, her quiet days alone in her little house on Maple Street. I told her about M.A. Rida and how much I still missed her, about Charlie and how he'd been my anchor for all those years. I told her about the farm and the land and the strange turn my life had taken since Charlie died. I didn't tell her everything, not about the deeds or the power or the judge. Some things were too big to share on a first date. But I told her enough, and she listened without judgment. You've been through a lot, she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. It sounds like you've had some good people in your life, though. People who loved you. The best, I said. I was lucky that way. She smiled, and I felt my heart do that strange little skip again. Lucky is one way to put it. I'd say you rened it, though. You seem like the kind of man who works hard and doesn't complain much. That's our these days. Complaining never did anybody any good, I said. Alia rened that from Charlie. We talked until the diner closed, and then we stood in the parking lot saying goodbye. I wanted to kiss her, but I was too nervous, too red of messing things up. She must have seen it in my face, because she leaned in and kissed me on the cheek. Next time, she said with a wink, you can do the honors. I drove home with a smile so wide it almost hurt. Duke was waiting on the porch, and I told him all about it. Not see a ring that he couldn't understand a word. He wagged his tail anyway, which I took as a sign of approval. Over the next few months, things settled into a rhythm I hadn't expected to find at this stage in my life. I saw Ellen 3 or 4 times a week, taking her to dinner, to the movies, to the little church bazaars that she loved. We walked through the fields together, and I showed her the places where Charlie and I used to hunt, the creek where we'd fish for catfish, the old oak tree where we'd say revet our names. You really loved him, didn't you? Ellen asked one afternoon as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. He was my brother, I said. Not by blood, but by everything that mattered. He saved my life more times than I can count. Did he know how you felt? Did you ever tell him? I thought about it. About all the years we'd spent together. All the things we'd said and left unsaid. I think he knew. I hope he knew. I told him plenty, but I never told him the most important thing. I never told him I'd give anything to have him back. Ellen squeezed my hand. He probably knew that too. Some things don't need to be said out loud. I nodded, blinking back. TRS. You're a SMART woman, Ellen. Too SMART for an old fool like me. Nonsense, she said. Fools are the best kind of people. They're the ones who take chances. The winter came and went, cold and gray, but not unbearable. I spent the long evenings with Ellen, reading or watching TV, or just sitting in comfortable silence. Duke took a liking to her, which was a good sign. The old hound had always been a good judge of character. By spring, I'd made up my mind. I invited Ellen to a special dinner at my house, the first time she'd come over since we'd root seeing each other. I had the best meal I could manage, a pot roast with potatoes and rots, the same thing that I used to make on Sundays. I lit candles and set the table with the good dishes, the ones that had been in my family for 3 generations. This is lovely, Ellen said when she arrived, looking around the kitchen with a smile. You went to a lot of trouble. You're worth it, I said, pulling out her chair. That we ate and talked and laughed, and when the dishes were read away, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small velvet box I'd been carrying around for weeks. My hands were shaking as I opened it, revealing the simple gold ring I'd bought at the jewelry store downtown. I know we're not young, I said, my voice cracking slightly. And I know we haven't known each other very long. But I've been alone for a long time, Ellen. And I think I've been waiting for you to come along. I can't promise you riches or adventure, but I can promise you a good life. A quiet life. A life with someone who'll love you and take care of you and never let you feel alone again. Ellen's eyes filled with TRS, but she was smiling. Jim H.A. Risen, you old romantic. Are you asking me to you reckon I am? I said. Will you have me? She leaned across the table and kissed me, a real kiss this time. warm and sweet and full of promise. Yes, she said against my lips. Yes, I will. We were married 3 months later, a small ceremony at the church with just a handful of friends and family. Tommy, the boy who'd helped me with the harvest, was there with his parents, and Mr. Hudson came to officiate the legal side of things. Ellen's children flew in from the city, and though they were worried at first, they were remed to me when they saw how happy their mother was. Ellen moved into my house, which didn't feel so empty anymore with her in it. She brought her own furniture and pictures, and soon the place felt more like a home than it had in Yaris. Duke loved her, following her around the house like a puppy, and she spoiled him rotten with treats and belly rubs. I'd been worried that the changes would be too much, that I'd miss the solitude and the silence. But I didn't. I'd spent a lifetime alone, surrounded by ghosts and memories. Having someone to share my days with, someone to talk to and laugh with and grow old with, was a gift I'd never expected to receive. The summer brought new challenges and new opportunities. A developer from the city contacted me, offering a staggering amount of money for the land Charlie had left me. I turned him down without hesitation, but I took his CARD and filed it away. You never knew when you might need a connection. Instead, I used the rental income from the properties to set up the foundation Mr. Hudson had suggested. We called it the Charlie Mitchell Memorial Fund, and its mission was simple: to help local families keep their homes and farms, to provide scholarships for kids who couldn't afford college, and to preserve the rural character of the county that had been my home my entire life. The first grant we gave went to Tommy's family. They'd been struggling to pay the mortgage on their own small farm, and I'd seen the worry in the boy's eyes every time he came to help me. The check I wrote them covered their debt and gave them room to breathe. When I handed it over, Tommy's father broke down in tears. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. H.A. Risen," he said, clutching the check like it was made of gold. "We were about to lose everything." "You won't," I said. "Not as long as I have anything to say about it." The foundation grew slowly but steadily. We bought up more land as it came available, adding to the holdings Charlie had SDA root. We made sure the land stayed in local hands, used for farming and open space instead of shopping malls and housing developments. The county changed, but it changed in a way that respected its history and its people. Judge H.A. Risen kept his word, though I knew it pained him. He'd been forced to sell his big house on Oak Street, using the money to pay off some debts that had come to light after his influence waned. He moved into a smaller place on the edge of town, and he spent most of his time fishing on the lake, a quiet life for a man who'd once ruled the county. Bill Tompkins never came back. I heard from a friend that he and Susan had moved to Florida, living on what was left of their savings and drinking too much. He tried to find work, but the scandal had followed him wherever he went. His name was poison in the circles he'd once moved in, and he'd burned too many bridges to build new ones that I didn't feel much sympathy for him. He'd made his choices, and he'd paid for them. But I prayed for him sometimes, for both of them, hoping they'd find some peace in their new life. One evening in late summer, I sat on the porch with Ellen and Duke, watching the fireflies blink on and off in the meadow. The corn was tall and green, promising a good harvest, and the air smelled sweet with the scent of hay and wildflowers. Everything was quiet and still, the way it always was at the end of the day. "You're thinking about Charlie again," Ellen said, her hand resting on my arm. "I can always tell." "I am," I admitted. "I was thinking about what he'd say if he could see us now. All the things he set in motion, all the lives he changed." "He'd be proud of you," she said. "I know he would." I pulled out my pipe and packed it slowly, taking my time. He'd probably say I was making too much of it. He was always like that. Never wanted any credit for the good he did. Just wanted to help people and keep his head down. "That's what made him special," Ellen said. "People like that, they don't come along very often. You were lucky to have him." I said. "And I'm lucky to have you, too." She leaned her head against my shoulder, and we sat together in the deepening twilight. Duke sighed contentedly at our feet, and the fireflies danced their silent dance in the field beyond. The years that followed were the best of my life. Ellen and I traveled a little, to places we'd always wanted to see. We visited M.A. Ritha's grave together, and I introduced Ellen to her, telling her all about the woman who'd been my first love. Ellen understood, the way she understood everything. She wasn't jealous of M.A. Ritha's memory. She just wanted to be part of my life. All of it, past and present, that I kept in touch with Tommy, watching him grow from a scrawny kid into a strong young man. He went to college on a scholarship from the foundation, studying agriculture, and he came back to work the land with me. When I got too old to do the heavy lifting, he took over the day-to-day running of the FARM, treating it with the same care and respect that I had. The foundation grew, expanding its reach to neighboring counties. We helped families keep their FARMs, funded community gardens, and gave college scholarships to dozens of local kids. Every year, on the anniversary of Charlie's death, we held a small ceremony in his honor, planting a tree or dedicating a bench in the town square. It wasn't much, but it was something. A way of saying thank you. Even though he wasn't there to hear it one afternoon, I was sitting on the porch with Duke, who was older now and slower, his muzzle gone gray with age. Ellen was inside, preparing dinner, and Tommy was out in the fields, finishing up the last of the day's work. It was a peaceful scene, the kind I dreamed of in the arcade days after Rutha and Charlie were gone. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old safe key, the one that had rooted it all. It was rusted and worn, barely recognizable as the object that had changed my life. I held it in my palm, feeling its weight, thinking about all that had come from that single moment of discovery. Thank you, I said softly, looking up at the sky. For everything. The wind rustled through the corn, and for a moment, I could have sworn I heard Charlie's voice, the same one that had guided me through so many years. You're welcome, old friend. You're welcome. I put the key back in my pocket and leaned back in my chair, watching the sun sink slowly toward the horizon. Duke lifted his head and wagged his tail, and I reached down to scratch behind his ear. Good boy, I said. Good boy. Life wasn't perfect, and it never would be. There were still hard days, still moments when the weight of everything felt too heavy to bear. But I'd learned something important, something Charlie had been trying to teach me all along. You couldn't control everything that happened to you, but you could control how you responded. You could choose to be strong, to be kind, to fight for what mattered. And in the end, that was all that really counted. I looked at my FARM, at the fields stretching out in every direction, at the house where Ellen was cooking dinner, at the boy who'd become like a son to me. This was what Charlie had been protecting all those years. Not just land and buildings, but a way of life. A community. A family. And I'd done right by him. I kept my promise. The land was safe, and the people who lived on it were safe, and the legacy of love that he'd left behind would last for generations to come. That night, after dinner, I sat down with a pen and paper and wrote a letter to Tommy. It was a simple thing, just a few lines telling him how proud I was of the man he'd become. But I also included something else, a copy of Charlie's letter to me, the one I'd found in the book. I wanted Tommy to know the whole story. I wanted him to understand that this land, this FARM, this foundation, it wasn't about me or even about Charlie. It was about something bigger. It was about holding onto the things that mattered, even when the world tried to take them away. Ellen came up behind me as I was sealing the envelope. What are you doing? She asked, her hand resting on my shoulder, passing it on. I said, the way Charlie passed it on to me. She smiled and kissed my cheek. That's what makes you a good man, Jim Risen. You always know when to let go. I laughed, a wah-rm sound that filled the room. I don't know about that. I held onto this land pretty tightly when Bill Tompkins wanted it. That's different, she said. That was fighting for something that mattered. Now you're fighting for something else. For the future. I looked at her, at the woman who'd come into my life when I least expected it, and I felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it almost took my breath away. I love you. I said, I know, she said, smiling. I love you too. And that was that. The end of one story and the beginning of another. A story about land and friendship and the strange twists of fate that lead us where we're meant to be. So here I am, old Jim Risen, sitting on my porch with my dog and my wife, looking out at the fields that have been in my family for 100 years. The future is uncertain, the way it always is. But I'm not afraid. I've got good people around me, and I've got Charlie's memory in my heart. That's all I need. If you've read this FAR, I hope you found something in my story worth holding on to. Maybe it's a reminder that old friends never really leave you. Maybe it's proof that it's never too late to start over. Or maybe it's just a good tale, the kind you tell around a fire when the night grows long. Whatever it is, I'm glad you're here. And I hope you'll stick around, because there's always more to come. Life has a way of surprising you. Even when you think you've seen it all. So take CA of yourself. Take CA of the people you love. And never forget, sometimes the best things in life come in the most unexpected packages, wrapped in rust and held together by the love of a friend. This is Jim H.A. Risen, signing off for now. I'll be here when you need me, just like I've always been. And if you're ever in the neighborhood, stop by for a cup of coffee. The pot's always on, and Duke loves visitors. Until next time.